Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Founders Day 2024. My name is Colby Reed, and I am thrilled that you've decided to join us for today's session on the nonprofit leadership and development sector. I'm joined by Dr. Kimberly Thornberry. And today, Founders Day is a longstanding tradition at the Murdoch Trust. It allows us to reflect on our opening day in June of 1975. It allows us to support and uplift the many nonprofits and organizations that are serving the common good of our region. And it also gives us an opportunity to reflect on the legacy of our benefactor, Jack Murdoch, how that has influenced our work over the last 5 decades, how it's impacting our work today, and how we believe that's going to weigh into our future as we move forward as an organization. We're really excited to have the opportunity to talk about the nonprofit leadership and development sector. Dr. Kimberly Thornberry, thank you again for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Colby. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, I'd love to start our conversation really zooming out to that 30,000-foot view, because I think a lot of people can understand the value of grants and financial investments in an organization. That's something we've talked about a lot today, is the different sectors and how they're investing grant-wise into these organizations. But so much of nonprofit leadership and development is investing in the people leading those organizations. Why is this such an important focus for us here at the Trust?
Well, this perspective starts with our founder. Of course, it's Founders Day. Jack Murdoch. We are people-focused because our founder was people-focused. He really believed that professional development was going to make the people and therefore the organization stronger. And the trustees at the start of the day talked about ways that Jack did maybe what's called non-cash investments in the people. So let's think back to the 60s. He had an open door policy, open communication. He had flexible work hours. That was kind of new. We talked about the fact that he focused on his employees' mental health. That was not commonly addressed in the 1960s. He had this quote that we love, and he said, "I believe we must concentrate on the education and training techniques." That's what he wanted to do. So one might ask, what education and training techniques might the Trust offer? So we looked at the data. We looked at research from groups like McKinsey and Bridgespan on key areas that all nonprofit leaders need to have in order to perform effectively. There's storytelling, something that you do very well. There's financial and operational systems, your business practices, human resources, program development, evaluation. I would consider these are the tracks on which all nonprofits need to run. If you are going to tackle things like hunger or environmental conservation or exposure to theater, systemic barriers to workforce development, strong administrative functions are essential. And we have chosen 3 that we feel have disproportionate effects on nonprofits. The first one is investment in your executive leader. 2, an empowered and aligned board, so board development. And 3 is a strong and strategic fund planned resource development. And we know that when we invest in these skills, decisions, how they behave in organizations, they have significant results for the people that they serve. And we can't do everything. We have 8 programs in these 3 areas. And sometimes in leadership, we talk about the difference between a river and a flood. So we don't do everything. What's the difference between a river and a flood? We have the beautiful Columbia River behind us. Rivers are strong and powerful because they have boundaries, right? Rivers are a mile wide and an inch deep. That can be destructive. So for our training and capacity building, we're kind of zeroed in powerfully on those three focus areas. We're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall. We're looking at the research, we're listening to our leaders, and we want to offer what we think that they need.
I love that data, and I really want to spend some time digging into that. But first, I want to step back kind of from a philosophical standpoint, where your comments really align with some words that we've been hearing throughout the day, and the idea of education as an undercutting philosophical element of the work of the Murdoch Trust. Lauren Schmidt-Dunlop talked about that with the arts, culture, and education sector. Would love to hear a little bit more about just kind of how education, educating leaders, educating organizations, how that fits in to that kind of broader ethos of the organization.
I think nonprofit leadership and development is an education sector. You can look at it that way. We do make grants, but we want the leaders and then therefore have the organizations to have better skills, to know how to make better decisions, to educate them on collaboration and community. And also, we know that we are not the ones on the front lines making this tremendous difference. And so we look to the leaders on the front lines. They're the ones doing innovative and sustainable solutions. And our job is to invest in them with grants, with money, but also educate them with what we're hearing absolutely will work, will help take them from good to great. We have a catchphrase that we use all the time here. Our fruit grows on the trees of others. So I don't want to say that our division is like fertilizer, but we I need to think about a different way to say that, but we really just want to invest in education and training and walking alongside the leaders in that way.
I think we could maybe call it like Miracle Grow. Maybe it's like that
Grow.
that vitamins that goes into the soil and feeds
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we want to be the miracle grow sector.
Yeah. I find the data, going back to the data you referenced, I find it fascinating, and it's been particularly fun for me as your colleague over the last several months as we've been navigating the sector strategy and kind of leaning into the NLD work, because there's so much ambiguity in that area of like, how do we make an impact in the education and development of these leaders? It's something we talked about in some of our other sectors where we talk about, for example, with Project Phoenix, we were talking about, how do you quantify staff burnout? How do you quantify, the staff capacity and bandwidth and things like that are kind of these, ephemeral ideas. I love how you've been able to zoom in these professional roles and find ways to quantify the results in certain areas. And I'd love if we could get a little bit deeper in each of these areas, maybe starting with leadership and development. How does the trust invest in leadership and development?
A strong executive director is a key predictor of an organization's health. McKinsey says maybe 60% or more. And they are dealing with so much, especially as nonprofit leaders. What are they dealing with? The day-to-day operations. They have to represent their organization publicly. They have to drive vision. They have to lead change. This is a tall order. Nonprofit leaders listening to this know that. They have to have a strategic vision. They have to inspire their teams. They have to scale. They have to innovate. They have to understand what are the emerging trends in their field. They have to be quite effective at addressing their community's need. This is a lot. We believe leaders should never lead alone. The board has the board. The staff is a team, but the executive director role, having all of these things on their shoulders, is a lot, and we want to be right there to support them. And we have a variety of programs designed to help them along on their professional journey. These include peer cohorts. We have a Women in Leadership program. We have an annual Leadership Now conference. So we have a few entry points to help walk alongside these leaders.
You talked also about board development, which is kind of a whole other area of leadership preparation. How does the trust invest in helping organizations with their board development?
Listen, we look at hundreds of organizations a year. We do not see healthy organizations with a dysfunctional board. We just don't. And again, we've had the honor of walking alongside hundreds of organizations in their journey to have a stronger board. It is transformational. And what does that mean? Let's talk about four things. We talk about what it's like for a board to have good governance, good onboarding processes, who's sitting around the table. We talk about what it's like to have a good culture at the board level. Peter Drucker said, strategy eats culture, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't have a good culture, all of these strategic things aren't going to happen. How is the board looking at the key performance indicators? How are they having a sustainable organizational plan? And finally, how is the board doing strategic planning? Often they're really good at planning. Everyone likes to go to planning, but sometimes the word strategic can feel scary. We like to demystify it and help a board understand what they're responsible for and how they can get there. And we just give them the tools and walk alongside them. Oftentimes, too, everyone is running so fast, just getting them in a cohort with a coach to learn this and talk about their organization and where they want to be, that can also be a transformational moment.
And the trust also uh, looks at the board pipeline as well in some of our programming, where it's not just we're looking at helping boards that have been formed, but also how do we help organizations form boards? How do we help individuals that want to become part of board service? How do they?
Yeah, we have a program called the Green Room, and it's for leaders of color who want to understand about board service, or maybe they're on a board and want to know more about what they can do. Maybe they want to rise to the board chair level, and we want to tell them how to do that.
Excellent. And then the third area you talked about was that strategic development plan. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the trust work in terms of supporting organizations in their fundraising strategies?
When we ask organizations about their capacity needs, hands down, year over year, it is fund development. They need a generous community to walk alongside them to accomplish their mission. They don't need to know why. They know why. Some of them need a partner on the how for raising money. So we have a cohort called Essentials of Development, and it's really detailed. It's really practical. Have you developed your case statement? Do you have an annual plan? Do you have a segmented donor list? You can't say, well, if everyone gave $25, we'd be all set. That doesn't work. Do we have a structured development team where everyone knows their roles and responsibilities? We talk about practical things. Are your events ROI worth it? Do you have a huge event with so much staff time and the ROI is really not there? Are you talking about what it's like to raise money from communities where there hasn't been generational wealth in the past? Or what it's like to do a donor ask when you still want to crawl under the table? When you ask for money, we get it. And we love to walk alongside you to learn better skills in that area.
One of the things that we've been talking a lot about today has been the trust's move to the sectoral strategy, and a lot of the work that's been done now, work that's been done in the past. Would love to see if you could share a little bit more about what are some of the things as you're leaning into this NLD sector, the nonprofit leadership and development sector. What are the things that are top of mind for you? What are the trends or the topics that you're really listening to as you're looking to the future?
We recently conducted a 5-state survey with our state nonprofit association partners, and we learned a few things. I'll tell you 5. Number 1, won't surprise you, I mentioned it before, resource development. Always top of mind and figuring out new ways to explain how to do that. Number 2 is a surprise for me. It was people capacity, human resources, succession planning, staff development, diversity, managing in a multi-generational environment, dealing with remote work, policies. I think HR radically changed over COVID. And I think we have nonprofit support organizations that are trying to catch up in that area. Number 3 was evaluation, the impact framework, the skills to collect, manage, report on data to make strategic decisions, communicating credible data. Everyone's always asking, how do you know what you're doing is working? And how do you do that in a way that's not burning out your frontline employees with Excel? Like there are ways to do measurement and evaluation a little bit better. And I would say the fourth area that we heard again was governance and how does a board and a team continue to get a multitude and a wide range of voices around the table to make better decisions. Because we know the data is super clear on that. When there are multiple voices and perspectives around a table, you will raise more money, you will make better decisions, you'll have greater impact for your community that you're serving. And I think about what's next. We continue to listen to our leaders, and we also hear the need for coaching. We understand the burnout level is high, and there's imposter syndrome. There's maybe dealing with that challenging board member. There's sticky personnel issues. There's forks in the road with scaling. There's pros and cons of a partnership. There's practical technological questions about what to do. And so we want to listen about ways we can come alongside and help prevent that burnout. I think some of the things that won't change in how we do it, we have a lens in our sector. We want to have outstanding content, really relevant data when you come to one of our programs. We think that the nonprofit leaders are heroes, and we want them to have world-class hospitality when they come to one of our events. We want them to have a connection and a network because they're involved. And we want to be a learning organization that's always listening to them. We hope that that's what they experience. We don't do a ton of webinars. If I felt behavioral change could come from a webinar, we would do 100. No offense about this webinar. I'm sure this is going to be really impactful. But when we think about ways leaders and groups change, we think that it happens through learning over time with a cohort, with a coach, so they look different at the end of it. So that's what we're looking, that's what might change and what might not change about what we do.
And I know that you were joking there about the webinar thing, but one of the things that's been fascinating as one of your colleagues to watch is how we've adapted when it comes to the delivery systems. For example, over COVID, we went from all in person to all virtual, like so many organizations, in a matter of, hours. And then there's been this discerning process over the last, several months as people have been coming out of COVID. How much does virtual play into it? How much does in person play into it? And kind of finding that secret sauce that really works, which I think has been fantastic.
Yeah, and we've learned from that too. And we moved several of our programs hybrid, some in person and some remote, but we do feel that a lot of the behavioral change and a lot of those conversation and trust level is happening at least for a period when we can get the teams together. And oftentimes we do work with teams because when we explain all this information to the ED, like board development or fund development, it just feels like a brick that then they have to then translate that knowledge back to their teams. But when we can have the team come together, relax, learn it as a team, that's kind of the secret sauce of how we think things are happening and change is happening.
Excellent. We're getting some wonderful questions from the audience. If you have a question for Kimberly, you're welcome to drop that in the Q&A box. I will say, if your question is, would we qualify for a Murdoch Trust grant? Unfortunately, we're not able to answer that on a case-by-case basis today. Also, if you have a question about, would I qualify for this program or to participate in this cohort? Also not able to answer that, but you can find that information on our website. How to sign up and how to get involved with the programs there is the best place to start. Would love if you could talk about the new challenges that we're seeing leaders facing since emerging from the pandemic that maybe weren't prevalent 5 years ago.
A few things come to mind in terms of challenges. First of all, organizations and leaders are dealing with increased demand for services. More mental health services are needed. More affordable housing is needed. More you name it, health services, increased demand for services. I would say another issue would be funding stability. There was some resources available during COVID, PPE money, it's not there. And so they have to figure out what that revenue pie is going to be. I would say adapting to hybrid work models. We mentioned this before. What does HR look like? And as I mentioned before, staff burnout. We've heard about quiet quitting. We've heard about the great resignation, and it can be really difficult to maintain an experienced staff when you're trying to expand your services when there is burnout. And there can also be increased mental health challenges, even among the staff that are doing the frontline services. We are listening to digital transformation, AI. I mean, everyone talks about AI, but the question is, how is everybody using it? Like what? What is it? How are you going to use it within your organization? Where do I start? And again, hearing I'm being called to higher accountability for impact, but the measurement and impact part of what we're doing is not dialed in. And I wonder what that's going to look like in a year from now. Can we make it better? Those are what we're hearing.
Oh, good. One of the questions, and you touched on this a little bit when you referenced the Green Room program, but you've shared a lot about helping current leaders. But what about the future leaders? How are we helping organizations with either, kind of currently, junior staff or lower level employees, how they're moving up to that executive level, or how we're helping, fund that or build that pipeline of future leaders and preparing them to take the reins?
I have two things to say to that. First, we have 3 programs for emerging leaders. The Women in Leadership program for women who are ready to take that next step in their organization. The Board Leadership program for leaders of color, Green Room, for those who want to start or expand board service. And then we have an internship program called Vision and Call for students right out of college who are thinking about starting their leadership journey in the nonprofit world. Of course, Murdoch can't do it all. So I just want to recognize all the organizations that are working with emerging leaders. For example, our 5 state nonprofit associations are incredible capacity building partners. And even if they don't offer it directly, between Murdoch and our 5 state nonprofit associations, we have the resources to know who's doing it, around, capacity building in our sector.
This is a great question for us to clarify, actually. You've talked a lot about the programming that happens in nonprofit leadership and development. People are curious if this sector only works in programming, if there are grants available, if they can apply for an NLD grant. How does that work?
I want to clarify that sometimes when you hear leadership and development in the name of the sector, you think this is where you go when you want a development director position or a new leadership role. So to clarify, when your sector is ready for a staff leadership position or a development position, you would get to that through your sector. And your sector lead would look at that and get to know your organization. We do help fund nonprofit organizations that are in the capacity building space. They're tremendous partners, but I wanted to give some clarity on that language.
Excellent. And then the last question is, do you have any final thoughts, any things that we maybe didn't touch on, or any key takeaways you want to make sure people walk away from today's conversation when it comes to the work that you all are doing?
I want to just thank the leaders for we've had hundreds and hundreds of alumni through our program, and it's been fantastic to have the vulnerability for us to kind of look under their hood and walk with them for years, really. That's been such a privilege. We understand the time it takes to participate in these programs. And I also want to thank so many consultants and groups out there that are also in the capacity building service in this region. I feel such solidarity with what they're doing. But I want to encourage nonprofit leaders and boards to put professional development and training in their strategic plan. And it doesn't need to be with Murdoch, although Murdoch, can I do a commercial?
Please do.
Okay. We do have some programs coming up, our board leadership cohort and our essentials of development for fundraising. Those applications closed July 15th. We just closed a peer cohort group for executive directors in year 3 through 6, but we are still recruiting for our executive director leaders who are leaders of color, our BIPOC leaders. Those applications close in November. So our doors are open. And we are also listening to the capacity building needs and how we can affect our strategic plan. But regardless of where you get it, I would love to make sure that professional development continues to be in the strategic plan of the board and of the organizations.
Dr. Thornberry, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for all that you do. It is a pleasure to be your colleague. It's been a pleasure to see the development of the programs over the last several years in particular, and coming out of COVID. You've done just a fantastic job. We're grateful for all that you do.
Thank you so much.
And we're grateful for all of you for joining us today for this session. Just as a note, we will be sharing a recording of this. We welcome you to share that with anyone in your network. Also, if you're curious about some of the organizations that we serve and some more information on some of that programming that Dr. Thornberry mentioned, you can find that in our annual report, which actually went live today, murdochtrust.org/annual report. And with that, we thank you so much. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a happy Founders Day.